one major finding that we have is that effective mitigation will not be achieved if individual agents advance their own interests independently. And therefore, may I submit that this report brings out the need for an unprecedented level of international cooperation.
The study, drawing on work by more than 1,000 experts, said a radical shift from conventional fossil fuels to low-carbon energy, such as wind, solar, or nuclear power, would shave only about 0.06% point a year of world economic growth.
You could say it does not cost the world to save the planet. So at least it seems to me this could be an appropriate summary of the cost table.
The report, endorsed by governments, is meant as the main scientific guide for nations working on a UN deal to be agreed in late 2015 to rein in greenhouse gas emissions that have hit repeated highs this century, led by China's industrial growth.
We felt that it would be inappropriate to present the material in a way which prescribes specific allocation of targets to specific countries, because the same global goal can be achieved with many different burden-sharing schemes.
Governments have promised to limit temperature rises to a maximum 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial times to avert ever more heat waves, floods, droughts, and rising sea levels that the IPCC says are linked to man-made warming. But policies in place so far are inadequate and put the world on target for far higher rises.
But let me concentrate on two things. One is sea level rise, because if we compare, sea level rise is actually occurring on the high side of what we were anticipating in the third and the fourth assessment report. And it's not uniform. And we saw already some of the dramatic impact of that in the recent typhoon Haiyan in the Philippines, where, by the way, the sea level has been rising even faster than the global average by about 1.2 centimeters per year near where the cyclone happened. The other thing where there's significant better understanding on the vulnerability as well is on the fact, and this is in the report, there are many examples on the attribution. You see in the third assessment report, the typical answer scientists would give you if you say, is it due to climate change? The typical answer was, no, we cannot say that. However, what we see is consistent with what we expect, which is a correct answer, by the way. But now, on a few occasions, we have gone one step further. Some events can indeed, we can say, they would have been very unlikely, or in some cases impossible to occur without climate change. And although it's a little bit outside of the scope of the second working group report, because it's very recent, the recent heat wave and drought in Australia falls into this category.
Faster action is needed to keep global warming to agreed limits, and delays until 2030 could force reliance on technologies to extract greenhouse gases from the air. Such cuts are far deeper than most governments are planning. Ambitious mitigation might even require removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Delay in acting to cut emissions until 2030 would force far greater use of such technologies, a 33-page summary for the policymakers said.
What we would like to be able to say in a really comprehensive way, what are the damages that accrue from unmitigated climate change if we just do continued high emissions? What are the damages that accrue if we mitigate ambitiously? What are the residual damages? And the difference between those you might think of as the avoided damages. And you could think about those avoided damages in a number of different ways. The reason I showed the reasons for concern is that it characterizes some of the ways you might think about it. Global aggregate impacts is one. Risk to rare and endangered systems is another. Unique singular events is another. These distributional effects that we talked about are others. And so the idea of the global aggregate number is not irrelevant, but it's certainly not the only way you want to think about it. But the important key to the numbers is that the number we present for the global aggregate economic impact is more or less the sort of linear deterministic approach to the impacts that might hit the economy at a warming of around 2 degrees, kind of the warming level you might get with ambitious mitigation. That's the residual impacts, and those are the ones we have to adapt to anyhow. The number that you would like to have, what would be the impact of the global economy at warming level without mitigation, with continued high emissions, we don't present because we think that it's sort of beyond the capability of the linear traditional economic approaches to describe that. And so therefore the way we present the issue of avoided impacts, the difference between the unmitigated and the residual, is in terms of reducing the risks, especially to these 5 key reasons for concern, of which the global aggregate damage is an important one, but it's not necessarily the most important. The distribution of impacts, the threats to rare and endangered systems, the risks of unique large-scale issues like the collapse of a global ice sheet, and the distributional are all equally important, and we certainly wouldn't want anyone to come away from this report thinking that it's appropriate to do a simple, traditional cost-benefit analysis comparing unmitigated impacts with costs of adaptation. That should be a part of it, but it's important to recognize that the numbers we present are not that. They're the numbers that are much closer to thinking about residual impacts. Those are the impacts that we have to deal with regardless of how effective we are with mitigation.
One method mentioned by the IPCC is to burn wood, crops, or other biomass to generate electricity and capture the greenhouse gases from the exhaust fumes and bury them underground. The experimental technology would reduce the amount of carbon in the natural cycle of plant growth and decay. But there are risks. For instance, that vast areas of land will be needed to grow biomass, displacing crops and pushing up food prices. Simpler methods to extract greenhouse gases from the air are to plant trees which soak up greenhouse gases as they grow.
Poverty is going to intensify the impacts of climate change, meaning that climate change acts as